Please don't shave my hair, Myra whispered. Children die when it falls. No one in the circle looked surprised. Her hair dragged the red earth. Black, impossible. The only hair in a village where every woman was born bald. It had never been cut. Not out of love. Out of terror. The last time a blade touched her head, 7 newborns stopped breathing in their mother's arms. Mrs. Vivian's daughter was the first. Now she stood above Myra, blade in hand, deciding whether revenge was worth another graveyard. If you shave it now, Myra said, voice breaking, what will it cost us? Everything, Mrs. Vivian whispered, staring at the girl whose existence had killed her child. Elder Collins stepped into the space between them. His voice was ritual. Rehearsed. The tone of a man repeating a sermon he'd given too many times. You were not spared because you were innocent, he said to Myra. You were spared because the village needed somewhere to put its curse. Auntie Grace watched from the shadows, the only one who knew the truth. Myra wasn't their salvation. She was their punishment. And the reckoning had just begun. In a village where no woman grew hair, they learned to forget what softness felt like. Mothers never braided their daughters' heads at dawn. Girls never sat between their grandmother's knees while stories unwound with each plait. The language of touch that connected generations, the gentle tug, the careful parting, the oil warming between palms, had been erased so completely that even memory felt like theft. They called themselves the Bare Ones. Wore their smooth skulls with a pride that tasted like ash. But at night, when no one watched, some women traced their scalps with trembling fingers, searching for something that refused to grow. Something stolen before they were born. The curse didn't announce itself with thunder or blood moons. It arrived quietly, the way rot creeps through fruit, slow, inevitable, complete. 3 generations had passed since hair last grew on a woman's head in this place. 3 generations since the widow's scream split the air, you will become bald from generation to generation. They'd shaved her first. Dragged her to the square for daring to grieve too loudly, for refusing to smile through her husband's sudden death, for asking questions no one wanted answered. The blade had carved away her dignity in public. She'd left barefoot, bleeding, cursed. She'd left pregnant. No one spoke of that part. How her belly had swelled with secrets as she walked into the forest. How 9 months later, on the night of the full moon, screaming echoed from the darkness, then silence. Some said she died in childbirth. Others claimed she'd melted into the trees, her rage feeding the roots. But the baby survived. And the baby had hair. Myra was born 17 years later, on the anniversary of that woman's banishment. Born with her mother's last breath still warm in the air. Born into a hut that smelled like copper and fear. The midwives had stumbled backward when they saw the black strands covering her skull. Thick, impossible, wrong. It's the curse returning to mock us, one whispered. No, Auntie Grace had said, her voice cutting through panic like a blade. It's the curse coming home. Now Myra knelt in the red dust, that hair dragging the ground behind her like a train of condemnation. Mrs. Vivian stood above her, fingers wrapped around a blade that caught the dying light. Every woman in the circle wore baldness like a uniform. Every woman except one. Please don't shave my hair, Myra whispered. The words everyone had been waiting for. Children die when it falls. The silence that followed wasn't shock. It was recognition. Feet shifted in the dust. Eyes dropped to the ground. Somewhere in the circle, a woman's breath caught, not in surprise, but in the way you breathe when someone finally names the thing you've been carrying in your chest for years. They knew. Every woman standing there knew. Elder Collins stepped forward, his shadow falling across Myra like a grave. You were not spared because you were clean of blame, he said, voice steady as ritual. You were spared because the village needed somewhere to leave its future. Mrs. Vivian's hand tightened on the blade. Her daughter had been the first. Born 6 months after Myra, born silent, born breathing, then stopped 3 days later. No fever. No warning. Just the small chest rising, then still. The elders had come to her hut afterward, had looked at the tiny corpse and said nothing. But their eyes had shifted toward the house where baby Myra lived, where impossibly black hair grew longer each day. The correlation was never spoken. Speaking it would make the murderers instead of victims. How many? Myra's voice cracked. How many children? 7, Auntie Grace said from the circle's edge. Her first words. Her last mercy. 7 firstborns in 17 years. Each one born when your hair grew past a certain length. Mrs. Vivian's face twisted. My daughter was first. She would be 17 now. Your age. But she's bones in the ground because you, her voice broke on something sharp. Because you wouldn't die. Myra's hands found her hair, fingers tangling in the weight of it. Every inch had cost a life. Every strand was purchased with someone's scream at dawn, some mother's empty arms. If you shave it now. Myra whispered again, but the question died. She already knew the answer. They all did. The wombs would close. The firstborns would stop breathing. The curse would reset, and the counting would begin again. But whose child would pay the price this time? Mrs. Vivian lunged. Not with a blade, with her bare hands. She grabbed Myra's hair, yanking her head back so violently that vertebrae cracked. The girl's scream tore through the evening air, but no one moved. Not yet. They were waiting to see which direction grief would choose. You think you're special. Mrs. Vivian's spit landed on Myra's cheek. You think carrying this makes you holy. She twisted harder, and several strands came loose in her fist, black threads that caught the firelight like silk spun from nightmares. The moment they separated from Myra's scalp, somewhere in the village, a pregnant woman gasped. Her hands flew to her belly. Inside, something that had been moving went still. Auntie Grace heard it first, that silence louder than screaming. Her weathered face cracked open with recognition. Vivian. Stop. But Mrs. Vivian had waited 17 years for this. 17 years watching other women hold their babies while hers rotted in the ground. 17 years of counting days, watching Myra's hair grow longer while the distance between her and her daughter grew wider. Grief had been patient. Now it was starving. My child died so yours could live, Mrs. Vivian whispered, her voice breaking into something jagged. Tell me why that's fair. Tell me why your life mattered more. Myra couldn't speak. Her throat had closed around the answer they all carried. It wasn't fair. It had never been fair. Fairness wasn't part of curses, only consequences. Elder Collins raised his staff, but Auntie Grace's hand shot out, stopping him. Her eyes were fixed on something beyond the circle, beyond the village. To the forest where the widow had disappeared. To the place where debts came due. Because she isn't the one who has to pay, Auntie Grace said quietly. Mrs. Vivian's grip loosened. Just slightly. Just enough for doubt to slip through. Then who does? Auntie Grace's eyes held the kind of knowing that comes from surviving what should have killed you. The widow, she said, and the name landed like a stone in still water. Ripples of recognition spread through the circle. She didn't curse us because we shaved her. She cursed us because we let her daughter die. Mrs. Vivian's hand went slack. Myra's hair slipped through her fingers like water finding its way back to earth. There was no daughter, Elder Collins said, but his voice wavered. She was alone when she was 8 months pregnant when you dragged her to the square. Auntie Grace's voice cut clean through the lie. I was there. 12 years old, hiding behind my mother's skirts. I watched the blade. I watched the blood. I watched her walk into the forest with her hands on her belly and murder in her eyes. The fire crackled. No one else breathed. 3 days later, they found the body. Woman, not widow. And beside her, Auntie Grace's throat worked. A baby girl. Umbilical cord still attached. Hair black as midnight, already growing past her shoulders. Dead before her first breath. Strangled by the very thing that made her beautiful. Myra felt something cold slide down her spine. The arithmetic was simple. The widow's daughter would have been 17 years older than her. Would have been. The curse isn't punishment, Auntie Grace said. It's a trade. The widow took her daughter's hair, all that impossible, murderous hair, and wove it into a bargain with whatever lives in the deep forest. One girl would carry what killed her child. And that girl's existence would cost 7 lives. 7 for the 7 women who held her down while they shaved her dignity away. But there were more than 7, someone whispered. Auntie Grace smiled. It wasn't kind. Then someone's been lying about how many hands held the blade. Mrs. Vivian's face drained white as bone. Her grip had been first. The blade fell from Mrs. Vivian's hand. It landed point first in the dust, standing upright like a grave marker. No. The word came out small. Childlike. No, I was helping. She was dangerous. They said she was. She was grieving. Auntie Grace's voice held no mercy now. Only accounting. Her husband died in his sleep. No poison, no violence. Just stopped breathing. But grief that loud made people uncomfortable. Made them wonder what she knew that they didn't. Mrs. Vivian shook her head, but her hands had found her own skull, fingers tracing the smoothness there. Searching for something that would never grow back. I didn't know she was pregnant. None of us knew. You knew she was human. Myra's voice startled everyone, including herself. She was still kneeling, hair pooling around her like spilled ink, but her eyes had gone hard. You knew she could bleed. The circle shifted. Bodies turning slightly, weight redistributing. Preparing for what came next. Who else? Elder Collins's question cut through the tension. He looked at Auntie Grace. Name them. Your wife. Auntie Grace didn't hesitate. Your sister. Your mother. All dead now, buried with their secrets. But their daughters paid. Their granddaughters paid. She turned slowly, meeting each woman's eyes. Every firstborn death in 17 years traces back to someone who held that woman down. Some of you were children then. Some of you didn't hold the blade, you just watched and did nothing. A woman near the back began to weep. Quiet. Broken. Watching is choosing, Auntie Grace said softly. Mrs. Vivian's legs gave out. She collapsed beside Myra, close enough that their shadows merged. Two women carrying different pieces of the same curse. One wore it on her head. The other carved it into her bones 17 years ago. Then what do we do? Mrs. Vivian whispered. How do we end this? Myra's hand found hers in the dust. We go to the forest, she said. We ask her. The forest didn't begin where the village ended. It waited 3 miles past the last hut, beyond the cassava fields, past the stream where women washed clothes and pretended not to see the bones that sometimes surfaced after heavy rains. Myra walked at the front. Mrs. Vivian followed 2 steps behind, close enough to catch her if she fell, far enough to run if something worse than falling happened. Auntie Grace brought up the rear, her walking stick striking the ground in rhythm with words she wasn't speaking aloud. Protection prayers. The old kind. The kind that predated the church, predated shame, predated everything except fear. Elder Collins had forbidden the journey. The forest takes what enters it, he'd said. It doesn't negotiate. But they'd gone anyway. 3 women carrying different pieces of guilt, walking toward the place where it all began. The trees grew closer together the deeper they went. Branches overhead twisted into patterns that looked almost deliberate, symbols that made Myra's eyes hurt if she stared too long. The air tasted different here. Thicker. Like breathing through cloth that had been used to wrap the dead. She won't help us, Mrs. Vivian said suddenly. Her voice cracked the silence like dry kindling. Why would she? We killed her baby. We didn't kill her. Auntie Grace's correction was automatic. The hair did. That same hair Myra carries now. Myra's hand went to her head. The weight of it felt heavier here, like the forest was pulling on each strand, testing how much she could carry before her neck snapped. They reached the clearing at dusk. The widow's body was gone. 17 years had seen to that. But the tree that grew in that spot shouldn't exist. Its trunk was white as stripped bone. Its leaves were black as the hair that strangled a baby in the womb. And carved into the bark, still bleeding sap that looked too much like blood, were 7 names. The first one read, Vivian. The 7th one was blank, waiting to be filled. Oh God, Mrs. Vivian breathed. The tree breathed back. Not God. A voice whispered from everywhere and nowhere. Never God. The voice didn't come from the tree. It came through it, like wind through a hollow throat, like breath through a corpse's chest. The black leaves rustled though no breeze touched them. Myra stepped closer. Mrs. Vivian's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist, but Myra shook it off. Her hair dragged the ground behind her, picking up dead leaves and grave soil. When she spoke, her voice was steady in a way that terrified her. We came to negotiate. Laughter. Not cruel, but not kind either. The sound of someone who'd forgotten the difference. There's nothing to negotiate. The terms were set 17 years ago. 7 names. 7 deaths. 7 debts paid in the currency of first blood. Auntie Grace moved forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Myra. Her walking stick planted firmly in soil that felt too soft, too eager to swallow. 6 names are filled. 6 children are dead. The debt should be satisfied. Should. The word stretched like a thread pulled too thin. But someone added interest. The bark shifted. Moved. Reformed itself into something almost like a face, hollow where eyes should be, gaping where a mouth once screamed. Every time you cut her hair, the count resets. Every strand that falls before its time is another name carved, another womb closed, another mother's arms left empty. Mrs. Vivian's knees hit the ground. We didn't know. We never. You knew she bled. The face turned toward her, recognition sparking in those hollow eyes. You knew she begged. You held her anyway. And when my daughter strangled on her own beauty, when she died still connected to me, her hair wrapped around her throat like a noose, you went home. Washed the blood off your hands. Slept. The tree's roots broke through the ground. Thick. White. Moving like fingers reaching. So I made sure you'd never sleep well again. The 7th name began carving itself into the bark. Not Mrs. Vivian's daughter. Myra's. Myra watched her name form in the bleeding bark. Each letter carved itself slowly, deliberately, like the tree wanted her to feel every stroke. Myra. I don't understand. Her voice was disappearing. I didn't hurt you. I wasn't even born. Exactly. The widow's face in the bark smiled. It was the worst thing Myra had ever seen. You are the daughter I should have had. Born on the same day she died. Born with the same hair that killed her. Born into the same village that murdered me. The roots wrapped around Myra's ankles. Not tight enough to hurt. Not yet. Just holding. Just reminding her that running was never an option. You were made from my rage, the widow continued. Every inch of that hair is my grief given form. And when you die, when that hair finally chokes the life from you the way it choked my baby, the curse completes itself. 7 debts paid. 7 lives taken. Balance restored. Auntie Grace's walking stick came down hard on the nearest root. It recoiled like struck flesh, hissing. She's innocent. She's not part of what we did. Neither was my daughter. The hollow eyes fixed on Auntie Grace. You were 12. You hid behind your mother's skirts and watched. You could have screamed. Could have run for help. Could have done anything except stand there and let it happen. Auntie Grace's face crumbled. I was a child. So was she. So is this one. The roots tightened around Myra's legs. But children pay for their parents' sins. That's how curses work. That's how justice works when God isn't listening. Mrs. Vivian stood. Her hands were shaking, but her voice wasn't. Then take me instead. My hands held her. My daughter already paid. Let that be enough. The widow laughed. Oh, Vivian. You think you haven't paid yet? Something moved in the shadows behind the tree. Small. Child-sized. Breathing. Mrs. Vivian took a step toward the shadows. Then another. Her whole body was shaking, but her feet kept moving, pulled by something stronger than fear. Stronger than sense. Hope. The worst kind. The kind that carves you hollow when it's proven wrong. The child stepped into the moonlight. She was 7 years old. Would always be 7 years old. Her head smooth as an egg, eyes too wide, skin the color of ash. She wore the burial cloth Mrs. Vivian had wrapped her in 17 years ago. Still white, still clean, untouched by soil or rot or time. Mama. The word came out uncertain. Like she'd forgotten how to shape it with her tongue. Mrs. Vivian's knees buckled. Amora. Oh God, Amora. Not God, the widow's voice reminded her. Never God. 6 more children stepped from behind the tree. Different ages. Different faces. All bald. All wearing burial shrouds. All staring at the 3 women with eyes that had seen the other side and couldn't unsee it. They belong to me now, the widow said. Every firstborn that paid for your sin. I keep them here, in the space between dying and dead. They don't grow. They don't speak except when I give them words. They are my daughters now, since mine was taken. Myra felt the roots climbing higher. Past her knees. Wrapping around her thighs. The hair on her head felt heavier, like it was remembering what it was designed to do. How to strangle. How to kill. So here's my final offer, the widow said. Myra dies tonight, strangled by the hair that should have been my daughter's crown. The curse completes. These 7 children go free, back to their mothers, back to life, back to the world that kept spinning without them. Auntie Grace's voice cracked. And if we refuse? Then Myra lives. The children stay. And every firstborn in this village dies before their first breath for the next 100 years. Mrs. Vivian looked at her daughter's ghost. Then at Myra. Choose, the widow whispered. Mrs. Vivian's hand reached toward her daughter, fingers trembling. So close she could almost touch that small, cold face. Almost hold what she'd buried 17 years ago. Mama, Amora said again. The words sounded rehearsed. Borrowed. Like the widow was using her mouth to make shapes that would cut deepest. I choose, Mrs. Vivian's voice broke. Her hand hung in the air between her dead daughter and the living girl whose roots were climbing toward her throat. Stop. Myra's voice cut through. Clear. Final. I choose. Everyone turned. The roots paused mid-climb, waiting. The widow's face in the bark tilted, curious. You can't, Auntie Grace started. Yes, I can. Myra looked at the 7 children standing in their burial shrouds. At Amora, who would never grow past 7. At the others who died because she existed. Because her hair grew while their hearts stopped. I was made to die, Myra said. That's what you told me. I'm not real, I'm just rage-wearing skin. Grief that learned to walk. Her hands found her hair, gathering it like rope. So let me finish what I was made for. No, Mrs. Vivian lunged forward, but Auntie Grace caught her. Held her. Let her speak, Auntie Grace whispered, tears cutting tracks down her weathered face. Myra looked at the widow. At the hollow eyes that had watched her from birth. But I want one thing in return. You're not in a position to negotiate. I am. Myra lifted her hair higher. Because you need me to choose this. You need me to walk into death the way your daughter did. Innocent, strangled, stolen. If you force it, if the roots do it, it's just murder. It doesn't complete anything. Silence. The wind itself held its breath. What do you want? The widow finally asked. Myra looked at Mrs. Vivian. At Auntie Grace. At the village that raised her while hating her. Forgiveness, she said. For all of them. Let the guilt die with me. The widow's laugh was bitter. After what they did. After what we've all done, Myra corrected. You kept 7 children trapped between worlds for 17 years. You made me a weapon. You turned grief into a blade and called it justice. Myra's voice didn't rise. Didn't need to. We're all murderers here. So let it end. The widow was silent for a long time. The face in the bark shifted, reformed, became almost human. Almost recognizable. A woman who'd screamed herself empty. Who'd buried rage so deep it grew roots. Forgiveness, she repeated. The word sounded foreign in her mouth. Like a language she'd forgotten how to speak. Yes. Myra's hands tightened in her hair. You free the children. You release the village from the curse. And you let yourself rest. Rest. The widow's laugh was broken glass. I've forgotten what that means. Then remember. Myra stepped forward. The roots didn't stop her. Please. Something flickered in those hollow eyes. Not mercy. Not kindness. But something older. Something that had been buried under 17 years of rage and grief and death. Exhaustion. If I agree, the widow said slowly, the hair will take you the way it took my daughter. Wrapped around your throat. Choking. You'll feel every second. I know. And you choose this anyway. Myra looked at the 7 children. At Mrs. Vivian's shaking hands. At Auntie Grace's tears. Yes. The widow nodded once. The roots released. The hair began to move. It started gently, almost tender, gathering itself around Myra's throat like a lover's embrace. Then it tightened. Mrs. Vivian screamed. Myra didn't. Myra's world narrowed to the pressure around her throat. Not pain. Not yet. Just tightness. Like the hair was remembering how to kill. Learning the shape of death one breath at a time. She kept her eyes open. Watched the widow's face in the bark. Watched it soften. Watched 17 years of rage begin to crack. I'm sorry, the widow whispered. I'm so sorry. The words came too late to save anyone. But they came. Myra's knees buckled. The hair held her upright, a noose and a pillar, killing her and keeping her standing all at once. Her vision blurred at the edges, darkness creeping in like floodwater. Behind her, she heard Auntie Grace praying. Not the church prayers. The old ones. The ones that called to things older than God, older than curses, older than grief. The 7 children began to glow. Soft at first. Then brighter. Their burial shrouds turning translucent, their ash-colored skin warming to brown, to life, to real. Amora's eyes cleared. She looked at her mother, really looked, and smiled. Mama, I can go home now. The hair tightened one final time. Myra's last breath left her body. And the tree exhaled with her, a sound like wind through empty rooms, like doors finally closing, like rage letting go. The widow's face disappeared from the bark. The 7 children ran toward their mother's arms. Myra fell. The hair released her as she dropped, pooling around her body like spilled ink, like a crown, like everything beautiful that kills you in the end. Mrs. Vivian caught her before she hit the ground. No. No, no, no. Her hands pressed against Myra's throat, searching for a pulse that wasn't there. You can't. I didn't want. But Myra was already gone. Eyes open. Still. Free. They buried Myra where the widow's tree had stood. The bone-white trunk had crumbled to ash the moment Myra died, leaving only fertile soil and the memory of what had grown there. No marker. She'd asked for none. Let me become the ground, she told Auntie Grace once, in a conversation neither of them knew would matter. Let something grow from me that doesn't strangle. 3 months later, the first woman felt it. A tickle on her scalp. A sensation forgotten for 3 generations. She'd run screaming through the village, convinced she was cursed, until someone touched her head and felt the impossible softness. Hair. Fine as spider silk. Black as Myra's had been. Within weeks, every woman in the village had it. Thin at first. Tentative. Like the land itself was asking permission to give back what it had taken. The 7 children lived. Grew. Forgot the space between dying and dead, though sometimes Amora woke screaming, searching for her mother in the dark. Mrs. Vivian would hold her. Rock her. Whisper that she was home, she was safe, she was loved. But every morning, Mrs. Vivian walked to Myra's grave. Auntie Grace found her there one dawn, hands pressed flat against the earth. I got my daughter back, Mrs. Vivian said. Her voice was hollow. And it cost a girl who never harmed anyone. Yes. No comfort. No platitudes. Just the truth, bare and sharp as it had always been. She forgave us, Mrs. Vivian whispered. Why did she forgive us? Auntie Grace knelt beside her. Together, they touched the ground where Myra slept. Where something new was growing. Not hair, but roots. The kind that hold soil together. The kind that feed forests for 100 years. Because someone had to, Auntie Grace said. Someone had to choose mercy when all the rest of us chose blood. Above them, the sun rose. The village woke. Women braided their daughters' hair for the first time in living memory, tears streaming down their faces. And in the ground, Myra rested. Finally whole. Finally free. Finally forgiven for the sin of being born. The curse was broken. But they would carry her name like a prayer. And a warning.